It's my absolute pleasure to introduce my guest, Ashley Edwards. Ashley is a senior research scientist at Google DeepMind working on reinforcement learning. She received a PhD in 2019 from Georgia Tech, spent time at Google Brain as an intern, and as a research scientist at Uber AI Labs. Hello, Ashley.
Hello, Dan. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Are you ready for a grilling today?
Yes, I'm very excited.
Okay, great. I promise it won't be too scary. So we're going to start. Firstly, where are you?
I am actually in Abu Dhabi.
You're in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
Amazing. This is amazing. So we're live from Abu Dhabi. This is incredible. All right.
Yes, indeed.
Well, let's get started then. So we're going to go start off by going way back to when you were young. Who or what inspired you when you were growing up?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to start with the cliche answer, which is my parents.
Sure.
I think they always really motivated me to, go after any kind of career I wanted to. And so they were very inspirational. But also, I was lucky to have a lot of really good professors as my mentors throughout my, starting from university going into PhD.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, was there a moment with your parents where they kind of nudged you down a particular thing, career path, or sort of really got you excited about science or computing?
Not really. I mean, I
No.
think when I was younger, I played a lot of video games. I thought I would, create video games. And then I thought I would be a graphic designer. And I, at some point, maybe wanted to be like a singer. So they always were just like, you know what, like whatever you want to do, go for it. Just do your best at it.
What academic path did you take to become a AI research scientist?
Yeah, so I started off, I did a computer science bachelor's when I was in university. While I was studying computer science, I also did these sort of research internships to get me familiar with how the process of doing research. Eventually published a paper during my university as well. Went on to do my PhD focusing on machine learning, which is when I started doing what my sort of subfield is in reinforcement learning.
Yeah, I see. Okay. And what was like the most like challenging thing that you needed to overcome whilst on that path? Were there ever any points in your in that time when you're like, oh, I'm not really sure whether I'm on the right path, or is the right thing for me?
Yeah. So I would say like during my university, there weren't as many opportunities to do research in computer science. And so I would kind of have to go off to other universities to do that. But finding those opportunities weren't as easy as I would have thought they were. And then like when I started my PhD, it was also like, okay, this is kind of like a newer journey. Like a lot of people have maybe done research for their entire, university career or started doing computer science in high school and that sort of thing, which I didn't start doing until university. So these were kind of like a few challenges that it took a little time to get over. Yeah.
Yeah, I see. Okay, thank you. And so, like, moving on to your current role, which I think is the thing that like people are going to be super excited to hear about. You're an AI research scientist. What does an AI research scientist do?
Yeah, good question. It's very similar to what I was doing during my PhD. So essentially, I'm trying to solve new kind of problems, coming up with new problems that need to be solved. So reading papers, like scientific articles and that sort of thing, writing papers, writing code, coming up with ideas, watching YouTube channels explaining concepts that I can't get from just reading. A lot of what I was doing during my PhD.
Yeah. And so, like a typical day for you, like let's say, yeah, what is is there a typical day for an AI research scientist? But yeah,
Yeah.
just talk us through your day.
Yeah, so I guess there's more meetings, I think I would say during as a research scientist. So often there will be more meetings than I would have had in my PhD,
Yeah.
talking about maybe what I've been working on with other members of my team, discussing like new research articles that have been released. So like reading papers together. We have these things called reading groups where we'll like read like a new paper together. But it really just depends, like running experiments. And when you're running experiments, it can take some time. So usually like if you're running some experiments, then you might have time to read a paper.
Yeah, I see. So yeah, something's running in the background. Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so is there something that you studied like in school that you have found to be more useful now in your role than you ever thought would be useful when you were actually studying it?
Yeah, math.
Okay.
um, I-
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I always enjoyed like math, doing math calculus and that sort of thing, but I didn't know I would need it as a computer scientist. But you see it popping up all the time, especially in like machine learning, having like like the knowledge of calculus and like linear algebra and that sort of thing is really, really helpful.
Okay, I
Mhm.
see. And like, talk us through like how do you? I mean, a lot of the students on the call, they're going to be like really wanting to understand how do you build an AI? How do you build a model? You know, how does that work? How do you even begin? You know?
That is a good question. I mean, I think you always want to first start off with like, what is the problem I'm trying to solve?
Okay.
Um, Typically, you have something like inputs and outputs. So, what do I want to come in? What do I want to come out?
Hmm.
And so, like, if you're doing something like supervised learning, you want to maybe predict a cat in an image. Then the outputs will be like whether or not it's a cat or that sort of thing.
I'm just going to pause
Um,
you there a second. What does supervised learning mean for our viewers?
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm just throwing these terms out.
Yeah.
um, so it's a machine learning concept where essentially you're trying to train a model to be able to predict something where you have a giant data set of training labels that say, okay, in this image, for example, this is a cat. In this image, this is not a cat. And you're trying to learn how to predict what are the features of that image that enable you to predict whether or not something is a cat, that sort of thing. Does that make
Fantastic.
sense?
Yeah, that did. Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
please continue. Yeah.
Yeah, so my research is uh, in something called reinforcement learning, which is a little
Hmm.
bit different from supervised learning, where you're kind of training things through trial and error. And so the way you would train a model like that is like, okay, well, I'm going to give you something called rewards. So let's imagine we're trying to train a robot. And so we can say, okay, I'm going to give you a reward if you take the right step forward, and it's going to be like a positive reward. If you fall over, you're going to get a negative reward. And so you're essentially trying to figure out what did I do that it like allowed me to get the most rewards possible. So you train it to sort of like optimize the rewards it's getting.
Wow. So it's a sort of Pavlovian response, but for a computer.
Yeah.
So you are just one part of a massive ecosystem of people that you work with, both in your organization but other organizations as well. How important is collaboration in AI research? And can you share any examples of collaborative projects that you've been involved with other organizations?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I mean, I think it's really important, especially in this day and age. I feel like the field is growing so fast, and you're learning of all these different areas that you can sort of learn from people. So I think it's really good to like get these different groups together to try to solve these different problems. Like during my PhD, and I think PhDs in general are often very, very independent.
Hmm.
And so when I started my role, I was like, okay, I'm going to go off in the, in my corner and like sort of solve this sort of problem. But I started to realize like it's much better to get people together. And so I guess one of the most recent things that we've started working on is this project where we're like learning essentially to generate environments from videos.
Hmm.
And I know there was no way I could have done that on my own. I really like kind of took a really great team to be able to work on that.
Yeah, I see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, and then could you talk us through some of the projects that you've worked on previously? Because there's some amazing things, and like what you're most proud of like doing out of those projects.
Yeah, actually, I'll just go back to what I was just discussing.
Mhm.
So we recently put out this paper called Genie,
Mhm.
where we're essentially trying to generate like sort of interactive environments. So the
Mhm.
idea is if you train on a bunch of videos, in this case we use videos of 2D platformer games. We can essentially learn a model of what it looks like to essentially like play these environments. So if you give it a single image, like an image, like I've given it a picture of like my dog, I can kind of like play as my dog, um, like
Wow.
like it's a real game. Yeah. So that one I'm like, I mean, it really took it took some time to get it to work, but I'm really, really excited about it.
Yeah, and so it has applications in the video games industry,
Yeah, I could say
potentially.
that.
Potentially. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Um, Yeah. So would you say that's a sort of like a form of augmented reality or something? So you can place your own people, your own objects, and friends, family, dog in your case, into a game.
Yeah, so augmented reality, I wouldn't necessarily say it was like augmented reality, because it's not like uh, you're not seeing it in like real time. Like I wouldn't like I'm like pointing towards things. I wouldn't like take a picture
Right.
of a single scene and like be able
Mhm.
to like control it. Although
Yeah.
maybe we could eventually. But like one application is like there's many different applications. Like we trained it on 2D platformer games. We also trained it on robotics data as well.
Mhm.
And so essentially you can like learn a model from videos only, such that you can like control the environment. So we can take pictures, like we took a drawing of one of our advisors' children that they drew, and we essentially could like control the character in their drawing, like it was a game, which was quite cool.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Um, and so, what other things have you been working on? Well, stuff that you can tell us about, of course.
So that's honestly been the main thing I've been working on recently. So that was like about, I guess, over the past year. But in general, my research is about just training artificial agents to learn from videos. So that's more of a video generation model. So given an image, can you sort of generate a video, but you want to be able to control it.
Mhm.
But I also have been working on in the past, like how we can train agents to learn how to act by just watching videos. So I have like a couple of things that I put out there. Me and a team, of course, put out a couple of years ago as well.
Yeah. And could you
Mhm.
just define for us, what does artificial agent mean in that context?
Oh yeah, essentially something that can sort of act in the world, but it's trained using, in my case, like machine learning techniques. But it's essentially like what's taking the actions. So like if you're a robot, you can be considered an artificial agent. You're like moving around. If you're a computer, you can be considered, an artificial agent if you're like responding to things people are asking you and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you. That's awesome. So, ethics play a massive part in any kind of like computing endeavor. Like, what role does ethics play in shaping your work, and what ethical concerns do you have to consider as a researcher that are unique to the field of AI?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think we have like a big responsibility to consider how our work impacts people in the world. So we're often like having like when you submit a paper, you're often asked to consider like what are the ethical ramifications of what you're doing. So we're constantly sort of thinking about these things. We also have like people within the company who are experts in this that like when we're working on a project, we're sort of getting feedback on like how do you think that this can impact people, how can we, uh, rather than putting out something that could potentially be harmful, let's try to figure out how we can use it to better enable people, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to students aspiring to pursue a career in AI research?
Oh yeah, that's a broad question. Let's see, where do we
Yeah.
start?
Yeah.
um, yeah, so I guess having a background in computer science will definitely help because you'll be doing coding. Um, so starting from university, like I mentioned, I studied computer science. So you can do that also in high school or throughout your career. Um, I think if you want to do research, getting a PhD is a really, great path to take. It's the one I took.
Mhm.
But there's other ways as well. Like if you're going from university, they also have like research internships. You can do it in university. There's research engineers, so you can be doing more software engineering, but sort of touch on the research as well. So I think it also really just depends on like what do you want to get out of it? Like if you want to go into academia, there's always like the professor route, which I didn't end up going in. But I'm able to do research, which is what I was, the most excited about.
Mhm. And so, are there any like specific skills or qualities perhaps you believe are crucial for success when working in the field of AI?
Good question. I mean, I think it's something that anyone can really get into.
Mm.
I don't think there's one specific quality that you really need to have, other than curiosity. And I
Yes.
think that's like one of the most, I mean, I got into the field because I just thought it would be great to be able to sort of come up with these kind of problems, like figure out where can this be applied and apply it, you know? So yeah, just be curious and try things out.
Yeah, I see. Thank you. Well, I think it's time we get some questions from our students. We've got loads of them coming in, so I'm just going to go to our list over here. Okay, this is quite a fun one. Davey asks, what are your thoughts on kids using AI for cheating on their homework? Or
Oh
perhaps,
no.
maybe not cheating on their homework, but doing their homework, shall we say?
I mean, yeah, so as long as it's doing your homework and not cheating. I mean, I think that AI can really be used to enable people's learning. But I think, you know, if the assignment wants you to try things out on your own, you should always try it out. But it is a tool that can help you. You know,
Yeah.
I use these tools myself. Like I needed to build a website. I'm like, how do I do this? I don't know what I'm doing, and it helps me. You know, so I think it just depends on what you're using it for. As long as you are still learning in the process, you know. But no cheating.
Absolutely. That's a good answer. Yeah. So then we've got one here from Dunoon Grammar School. They ask, how long did it take to learn your coding languages? And any tips for a person new to coding?
So I guess I started out, I know you got university, so we call it college actually in the US. So I'm always like, but college is like your high school, whereas it's our
No, that's right.
university.
Yeah. So it's a bit like breakfast and lunch and dinner and like all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been switching my brain. Okay, so in university, I started off in my first year studying computer science. So the first language I think I learned was like C++ or something, and then I went to Java. The thing about learning a language or a computer language is once you learn one, it's really, really easy to learn others. You're really kind of figuring out what is the process of coding? What does it mean to be like a for loop or an if statement and that sort of thing? And once you learn that, you can very easily translate it over to one language. So my first year of university, I learned Java and C++. And then from there on, PhD, I learned Python in like a week or something, you know. So yeah,
Wow.
not
Yeah.
too bad.
Yeah. So once you've got the structural elements and you understand how blocks of code are put together, then you can apply that thinking that to other languages, and that makes things easier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, brilliant. And so, what do you think might be the next break? This is another question from Dunoon Grammar School. What do you think or hope might be the next breakthrough in AI, and what could that lead to?
Yeah, the field is changing really fast. I think I keep getting surprised when I see new things coming out. I think the most exciting thing these days has really been like video generation and image generation, and essentially being able to create new sort of scenes just given a single text prompt. So you can say like, generate me a video of a dog walking down the park, and you get like a really cool video that's just been generated, which is like, I mean, if you had seen image generation, like given a single text prompt generated image, if you had seen this like a couple of years ago, you would not have imagined, I think, that you can get video now. So I think this is like one of the things I'm really excited about. Like I mentioned that my research was in reinforcement learning, but I've kind of started doing this, you know, video generation, you know, research these days because it's just really fun.
Yeah, it's incredible what's coming out. That leads on to an interesting question from Josh, who asks, "Do you find AI scary in any way?"
Personally, not. But I
Yeah.
mean, I think there's definitely things like what could be scary about it. You know, like what are the sorts of things that it can do? And I think as long as you're asking yourself this question, but I haven't been finding it too scary. But I definitely understand why people would be kind of scared about, you know, some of the, you know, the potential for you know, AI.
Yeah, perhaps do you think the fear comes from a misunderstanding or mischaracterization of AI as, for example, a killer robot or something like that from the future, or something, you know, that the media tends to portray AI as?
Yeah, I think that can be a part of it, but I don't think it's the only thing that people are scared about. It's also, you know, potential for job displacement and that sort of thing, which I think is understandably that's definitely an understandable concern. So it's definitely going in directions that and at a faster pace than I would have been able to predict. But it's always, yeah, it's important to ask these questions, just so that you can be sure to avoid anything that could happen in the future that would have a negative impact.
I see. Yeah. And do you think, George asks the question, do you think sentient AI will eventually be possible?
This is one I'm always not too sure about myself. I think it's hard to say until you can define what it really means for ourselves, I guess, or like things like consciousness, like what exactly does it mean? But probably. I mean, why not? And further down the line, and I wasn't expecting video generation, so who knows?
Yes, yeah. That's the thing. That's the
Yeah.
funny thing. There's so many unknowns, isn't there? There's so many different directions and the cross-pollination of ideas, and obviously your research leads into that a lot and informs. I mean, all the things you're doing is so cutting edge that it's just you've these discoveries that you're making and will probably find themselves in something further down the line or not. These things. It must be a fascinating area to work in. That the work that you're doing is so cutting edge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
do you ever just pinch yourself and go, wow, I'm actually doing this for a job?
Honestly, yeah, for sure. Like when I started my PhD, the subfield of reinforcement learning, like very few people knew about. Now it's kind of everywhere, and so like being able to do the same sort of research at a company, and it's actually like exciting to people that aren't in the field. It's just kind of crazy to me.
Yes, exactly. I've got another question here from Olbin School. They ask, do you think AI could be used to combine all the best education techniques and subject content to remove the need for human teachers? Oh, that's a controversial one.
I don't think so. I think that there will always be new things to learn. I mean, even as it's just another tool, right? I mean, back in the day, there were people teaching you how to count numbers like this, and now you're like using calculators. So I think it's a tool that you're using. But as the field advances, I think education will advance as well, right? So I think we'll always need our teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so, and the flip side of that, of course, is like if you're a computer programmer, there are already AIs that assist you with coding. There's sort of, you can ask it a open text question and let's say, I don't know, create me a program that does X or Y, and it'll create you that program. And of course, you have to be able to understand that program to be able to know whether that program is doing the thing you want it to do, and whether you can learn and know how to debug it. But do you think in the future we'll still need to learn to code?
Good question. I think coding is going to be very different in the future, but I think that we're still going to need to learn how to build different kinds of algorithms. We're going to need to understand I think some of the concept as well. Like, what are the things that I want to build? Like, is this actually doing the correct thing? But I do think it's going to be a bit different than it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, is the reality of working in the field of AI and machine learning different from what most people think from the outside? Do people get what you do who aren't in the tech industry? Like when you chat to them, or do they come to you and say, "Oh yeah, I know what you do," and you're like, "No, I don't really do that at all, actually."
I think nowadays, people are starting to understand it a bit more than we did, like maybe 5-10 years ago. Just because I think you're seeing it reach the hands of like the public more and more, being able to interact with like language models or these image generation models. Like people are starting to understand what it means to be an AI. That isn't what you would see in like the movies or that sort of thing. So I definitely would say like during my PhD, people would just be like, whatever. And now I think people are getting more and more interested in it.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go back to the questions. We've got a question from Jacob who's asking, do you think schools should teach more advanced coding languages in earlier years?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, well, depends on what early means.
I
I'm not sure
suppose
how.
it probably means primary, which for us would be from, I suppose, primary and early secondary. So that would be probably like 5 to 13-year-olds, I suppose. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I mean, I think starting with some concepts early on could be very helpful. Like, what does it mean to be an algorithm, or what does it mean to make decisions like you would with an if statement or decision trees or that sort of thing. I think that could be very helpful because computer science is reaching basically every single field. So it kind of is like a core subject that I think is quite helpful to know. So yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. And then Ryan asks, will natural language programming mean that learning languages like Python will be yet less useful in the future?
I mean, languages have always evolved. When I was doing, like when I was in my university, people were kind of focusing on C++, Java, and now a lot more people are focusing on, I guess, Python. So I think in general, that's just sort of how it works. You learn more and more better techniques for compiling things and simplifying the coding process for people. So I mean, yeah, probably there'll be a new language down the line. There probably already are that I don't even know about actually. So
Yeah, something's being developed right now that we don't even know about. Yeah, that's going to
yeah,
be
for
the
sure.
killer language or something of the future.
Mm-hmm.
And then going back to the nitty gritty, Orchard, I think that might be a school name, but I'm sorry if it's a person's name, asks, how long does it take to fully develop an AI when you're like working on something yourself for your research?
Yeah, I think for this it kind of depends on like what you're working on,
Hmm.
what you're trying to solve. So if you're doing something like I mentioned, supervised learning, and trying to classify whether or not something is a cat or a dog, or whether there's clouds in the sky, that sort of thing can take a couple of days.
Yeah,
But there's also the process of coming up with what you're trying to train, but also training the model itself. So I'll get to that in a minute. But if you're trying to solve like a new research problem that no one's really worked on, that could take time. You're going to have to read papers about it, understand what kind of literature or things people have already tried out there. So doing that literature review can take some time. Learning what you want to do to solve the problem can take some time. Training the model can take some time. So
yeah.
sometimes it can take a week for you to realize that your model doesn't work.
Your model sucks.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's all the questions that we've had through. But thank you so much, Ashley, for taking the time out all the way from Abu Dhabi to talk to us today. We're really privileged to have you and for you to share to hear all the insights that you've got on your role. I hope everybody listening really enjoyed that and got a picture of what's like to do Ashley's job, and who knows, perhaps one of you or a few of you will become AI research scientists in the future. So thank
Mm-hmm.
you, thanks to all of you, thank you to Ashley, and thank you to all of you for coming along.
Thank you as well. Yeah, it's been great. And thank you everyone for joining in.